Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Warlords of Draenor Beta preview video. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at one of the new 5-man dungeons that's coming with Warlords of Draenor, and this is the Everbloom. And just a heads up, this dungeon is at the top of my list for quite possibly one of the best looking dungeons, and some of the fights in it are pretty amazing. Now, this dungeon in total has got 5 bosses, however one of them is an optional boss, but we are going to show you it anyway, because it's still a pretty fun fight. So just like with the rest of our dungeon previews, all we're going to do is take a look at the boss abilities, and then give you a quick rundown of how we dealt with them on the beta, and then closer to the Warlords release date, we will release a full normal and heroic mode guide for each of the dungeons. Now, this first boss goes by the name of Witherbark, and his first ability is called Brittle Bark. Now, Witherbark's bark dries and becomes brittle, causing him to become stunned and increases damage taken by 100%. However, this effect will be removed when Witherbark reaches 100 aqueous energy, and we'll talk about that energy in a moment's time. His next ability is called Parched Gasp, and this causes him to unleash a torrent of energy in front of him for a very high amount of nature damage, so standard do not stand in front of the boss mechanics do apply here. His next ability is called Living Leaves, and this inflicts a moderate amount of nature damage every 1 second, and also prevents enemies from attacking or casting spells when you're within this area of effect. The next ability is called Unchecked Growth, and this creates a viney growth that will move towards a player, and when it reaches that player, the growth will erupt and emit poisonous vapours which inflict a moderate amount of nature damage every 1 second to anyone that's standing within that area. Now, you do need to keep in mind where this unchecked growth has landed, because later on in the fight, if the growth gets hit by one of the aqueous globules, then it will come back to life and it will attack anyone nearby. And the final ability is the aqueous globules, and these will begin to spawn when Witherbark reaches his, dried out phase, so to speak. And these are spheres of pure magical water that will move in a straight line towards Witherbark, and each aqueous globule that reaches him will restore 25 energy. It's also worth noting that when one of these globules reaches Witherbark or is killed off, it will erupt and inflict a moderate amount of frost damage to everyone that's in the party. So this is quite a fun fight, we enjoyed it. We found it was quite simple to pull off, but also the damage that went out on players could be very high. So standard, do not stand in this mechanics applied to things such as the Parched Gasp and also the Unchecked Growth once it's erupted, as well as the Living Leaves. And you need to kind of keep an eye on the energy bar and where Witherbark is, because when he does become all dried up because of his brittle bark ability, you can either A, not kill off any of these aqueous globules that are moving towards him and let 4 of them just hit him so he reaches 100 energy, or B, you can kill them off as much as possible while dealing damage to Witherbark, as you've got the 100% increased damage towards him. So that's kind of a toss-up between which one you'd want to do. Keep in mind that your party is going to take quite a bit of damage if you do choose to kill off the globules and attack Witherbark at the same time. Moving on, this second fight goes by the name of the Ancient Protectors, and even though there's 3 of them, you need to keep in mind that they do thankfully share a health pool. Now, 2 of these protectors, all of their abilities are interruptible, and or some of them are dispellable, and the third one, who goes by the name of Dual-Hu, I think it's pronounced, kind of runs around quite a bit, charging people and dealing damage to them. Now, his abilities are called Rending Charge, which causes him to charge at a random player, wounding them, and dealing a small amount of physical damage every second for 25 seconds. His next ability is Grasping Vine, which causes him to wrap a random player in vines, which pulls them towards him and impales them. And then he will lash out with his Slash ability, inflicting a high amount of physical damage to any players that are in front of him within 8 yards. Now, Earthshaper Telu will try and deal damage to players, and all of his spells are interruptible, so you can keep that in mind. His first ability is called Nature's Wrath, and this simply causes him to blast a random player for a small amount of nature damage. His next ability is Bramble Patch, and this causes him to conjure a patch of brambles under a random player for 45 seconds, and the brambles will inflict a small amount of nature damage every 0.5 seconds, and also slow movement speed by 55%, so you obviously want to move out of this as fast as possible, as fast as you possibly can, using any kind of movement increasing abilities such as your blinks or your dashes to get out of it so you're not taking too much damage. And his final ability is called Briar Skin, which causes him to protect an ally with briars for 15 seconds. Now, this buff that he places on a player, or on a comrade as he'd call it, will reduce their damage taken by 75% and also inflict a moderate amount of nature damage to anyone that attacks that NPC. This ability is a magic effect, so you can dispel it from whoever it does go on to, so you should keep that in mind. And the final protector goes by the name of Life Warden Gola. And the Life Warden will do her best to try and keep her comrades alive with healing abilities. So her first ability is not a healing ability, so that was a bit of a lie. And it is actually a water bolt, which causes her to blast a random player with water, inflicting a moderate amount of nature damage. Again, interruptible, so interrupt it as and when you can. Her next ability is called Revitalizing Waters, and this causes the Life Warden to heal an ally for 10% of their maximum health, which in turn heals all three of them because they have a shared health pool. Again, this ability is interruptible. And her third and final ability is called Rapid Tides, and this causes the Life Warden to empower an ally, removing cooldowns from all of their abilities. Again, interruptible, and also a magic effect, so you can dispel it from the NPCs as and when it has been cast. So for this fight, we kind of just grouped them up as much as we can, grouped the three protectors up, and then we focused on making sure that Life Warden Gola was interrupted as a primary target, and then interrupt Earthshaper Tellu as much as you can. Again, multi-dotting and cleaving is beneficial for this, because all three of the protectors do share a health pool. This next boss is what we consider to be the optional boss, because it's not part of the 4 requirements in order to actually complete this dungeon. But nevertheless, this boss goes by the name of Zeri Tak, and this is a very venomous spider, which has 2 phases to its encounter. Now, in the first phase, she will just stay on the ceiling, and she will spawn spiders, mainly toxic spiderlings, and also venom-crazed pale orcs, into the room, and during this phase she will cast an ability called Descend, which causes her to descend from her web, looking for unsuspecting prey, and any pale orcs or players that are within the vicinity will be bitten for significant physical damage. So the hint there was the pale orcs, so if you have your ads stacked up, move them to where she's descending to, they will then get hit by her and take extra damage. I think it was after we killed 8 of the toxic spiderlings, she would then come down and we would enter phase 2. Now during phase 2, her first ability is called Toxic Bolt, and this is an interruptible ability which causes her to hurl a bolt of toxic blood at a target, inflicting nature damage. Her next ability is a poison ability, and this is called Venomous Sting, and this causes her to sting a nearby player at random, and once stung, the victim will suffer nature damage every 3 seconds for 15 seconds. The next ability is called Gaseous Volley, and this causes her to release toxic blood in the form of 2 missiles at ranged targets. Now, when the missiles land, they form areas of toxic gas, and anyone that stands in the area of gas will take nature damage, so you simply need to move away from that in order to not take damage. And her last ability is called Consume, and this will cause Zeltak to consume a pale orc, and if successful, she will heal for 25% of her maximum health. Now, what you'll probably see in the video is that she might heal a few times, but in the end we got to the point where we were like, okay, she's just still healing, we need to kill off the orcs in time, or what we could do is just Bloodlust and nuke her down, which is what we ended up doing. It's worth noting that throughout phase 2, while you're fighting Zeltak on the ground, she will spawn a few venom-crazed pale ones, as well as toxic spiderlings, in order to attack you and your party. The fourth boss goes by the name of Archmage Sol, and the Archmage will weave between Arcane, Fire and Frost in order to bring down your party. Now her first ability is called Parasitic Growth, and this is an interruptible ability which will cause the spores inside Archmage Sol's brain in order to try and take further control, and if this is successful, Archmage Sol's casting speed and her damage dealt will be increased by 50%, so you need to make sure you are interrupting this ability. Her next ability is called Parasitic Injection, and every time the caster changes their magic school, so from Arcane to Fire or Frost to Fire, etc., they will be injected by the parasites that have taken root in their brain, and each stack of Parasitic Injection will increase the damage the caster deals by 50%. Now, you can't remove this buff, so it's worth noting that by the time she's reached her third school of magic, the damage will have increased by 150%. Now she starts off in Fire, and in Fire spec she gains the ability Fireball, which is a simple fireball. She will launch at a random player, which is interruptible, and also Fire Bloom. Now Fire Bloom will cause the caster to fire off flames that will detonate all nearby Fire Bloom seeds in rapid succession. Now, when the Fire Bloom detonates, it will create a rapidly expanding ring of fire that will inflict a high amount of fire damage to anyone that gets caught in its path or who fail to jump over it. So you just need to keep in mind that you can either outrun it or jump over it, and jumping over it is relatively easy. When she reaches the Frost School of Magic, she will gain the ability Frostbolt, which is an interruptible spell which will cause her to fire a Frostbolt at a random target. And her next ability is called Frozen Rain, which is like Blizzard if you are a mage, which creates a cloud of frozen rain that will pelt victims below it, inflicting frost damage, and this ability is deadly, so you do need to make sure you are not standing underneath the cloud of frozen rain. And finally, when she phases into her arcane magic spec, she will gain the ability Arcane Burst, which again is interruptible, which causes her to send a blast of arcane energy at a random target, inflicting arcane damage. And she will also cast Arcane Blossom, which causes the caster to fire a multitude of arcane missiles in all directions, and players that get caught in the path of these missiles will take arcane damage, which deals a lot of damage. So for the most part during this fight, you're going to be interrupting a lot of the abilities, and then you're just going to be moving away from abilities that are coming towards you. It's fairly simple and straightforward, and it's probably the easiest fight in this dungeon. And now we come to the final boss, who goes by the name of Yalnu. And if you cast your minds back to a few news posts ago, from a few weeks ago, in one of the latest beta builds, you'll remember that there was this kind of portal and vines and things that appeared behind the Mage Tower in Stormwind. And that is related to this dungeon. Thankfully, that is where you will fight Yalnu. You will walk through a portal from the Everbloom into Stormwind and then fight the boss there. Now, he's got a range of abilities, and I might as well just say it now. We thought this boss was really amazing. We spent quite a bit of time wiping on it, but we got there in the end and finally killed it. And when we did, we were so relieved, but at the same time, we had so much fun doing it. Now, his first ability is called Colossal Blow, and this causes him to slam the ground in front of him, inflicting a very high amount of physical damage to any enemies that are in front of him, and also stunning them for 5 seconds. This means you just need to move away from in front of him. You can see the animation, it's quite clear there. Just move away from it. His next ability is called Font of Life, which causes Yalnu to radiate life, periodically creating swift sproutlings, vicious Mandragoras, and gnarled ancients in the nearby area. Now what you'll find is that throughout this fight you will get quite a lot of these adds spawning, and the sproutlings, the Mandragora, and the ancients have their own abilities that you'll have to deal with, but they're either, you know, a debuff on the tank, something that you don't stand in, or, you know, another debuff on the tank, so you need to make sure you're just moving away from them and moving from their frontal abilities. However, because there are so many of them, You will also gain help from the Kirin Tor, and you'll have a load of mages helping you, as you probably guessed from the video in the background, and we'll speak about them in a moment. But what you do need to keep in mind is that he has another ability called Entanglement, which causes Yalnu to hurl his Arbor Blade at a random Kirin Tor battle mage, creating life that will entrap them on the spot. Now the entanglement will stun the Kirin Tor mage and also inflict nature damage every second until the entanglement is destroyed, so when these spawn on the mages, you need to swap to them and destroy them as fast as possible. We also decided that it was easier to prioritize killing the adds that spawn over the boss, as you kind of had them all stacked on top of each other anyway, so you can multi-dot and cleave if need be. Now, because the Kirin Tor are here to help you, and there's a lot of them, you need to try and make sure as many of them survive as possible, because they use a range of AoE abilities on the adds that spawn, such as Arcane Orb, Ice Comet, and also Flame Strike, and also single target abilities on Yalnu when the adds are dead, such as Fireballs, Frostbolts, and also Arcane Blasts. So whenever one of them gets entangled, you need to kill the entanglement as fast as possible, and also make sure that your healer is keeping an eye on their health and topping them up when need be. But all in all, we found this was a really fun fight, and the dungeon itself, as well as looking amazing, was also fun as well. So that's going to do it for this Warlords of Draenor Beta preview video. If you are interested in future previews such as this one, then please do feel free to subscribe to the channel. And alternatively, if you'd like to keep up to date with all of the latest Warlords of Draenor news, please do head on over to flaskup.com.